Hi, so today we begin our first study of our first major world religion here in our world religions class. And I'm talking, of course, about Hinduism. So let's get started. Maybe the first thing to notice is that the word Hindu and the word Hinduism are not what they call themselves. This is a common pattern around the world, isn't it? Things get misnamed and those misnames stick. I mean, isn't it sort of strange that we still refer to Native Americans as Indians because of Columbus's blunder? He thought he was arriving in India when he was in fact landing in the Caribbean. So to this day, Native Indigenous Americans even call themselves Indians. It just stuck. So something kind of similar happened in India. The Persians, during one of the Persian conquests, mispronounced the word Shindu, which was what the local people called their major river, what we today call the Indus River. And they botched it and they just called it Hindu instead of Shindu. And so that stuck, and they referred to these strangers as the Hindu people, and they referred to their religion as the Hindu religion. Even the name India comes out of that mispronunciation. So I don't know if that's interesting to you, but it always grabs my attention when during periods of mass migration and conquest, things get called the wrong stuff, and then we're stuck with it. But you know what? Let's go ahead and call it Hinduism anyway. That's the handle everybody recognizes. But what do they call themselves? The people of India refer to their many, many different religious traditions as Sanatana Dharma. Sanatana Dharma. Sanatana means without beginning, or in another word, endless, eternal, changeless, stuff like that. And Dharma, really rich word we're going to unpack in much more detail in another video. But for today, Dharma means things like the order, the natural divine order of reality, and our duty within it. So Sanatana Dharma is what they call their own truth traditions in India, what we call Hinduism. And so Hinduism is an umbrella term. Let's use that metaphor. It's an umbrella term under which you'll find literally dozens and dozens of different schools of thought, different ideologies, different kinds of practices. So I'm afraid it's a bit of a bewildering variety we're up against here. But you know what? In these next couple, 2-3 weeks that we're going to be studying Hinduism, we're going to do our best to kind of find the through line that goes between all of these multifarious traditions and practices. We can still make great sense, I promise you, out of our study of Hinduism by focusing on the core texts, the core concepts, the core practices. And that's what we're going to be doing these next 3 weeks. So let's start with the Vedic period, what historians call the Vedic period, named after the word Vedas. And the Vedas are the earliest sacred scriptures of the Hindus, written in this Vedic period between, say, 1500 BCE and up to as late as 700 BCE. So in this long period of time, a series of texts begin to be collected, written by Brahmins for other Brahmins, priests, for other priests. And these ancient texts, again, the Vedas, from the Sanskrit word vid, V-I-D, meaning truth. So the Vedas really mean things like knowledge or wisdom. These are wisdom texts. And they're, in many ways, the most ancient scriptures on the planet. You know, there are some of the earliest books in the Hebrew Bible date back about this far, 2,000, 3,000, maybe BC. But nothing quite this sophisticated, this fully developed. So the Vedas contain largely hymns and prayers and myths about the gods directed to the gods. They're just blatantly religious texts. Lots of talks about lots of gods and lots of rituals and how to do this ritual and how to say that prayer. So that's what I mean when I say that the Vedas are kind of manuals for how to be a priest, written by priests for other priests. So I hope this doesn't sound disrespectful, but they're very difficult to read and they're not that compelling philosophically for us in the modern age. They're a little bit murky and impenetrable. They're written in a form of Sanskrit. Only a handful of scholars on earth really even understand. And so there's great debate about what they even say and what they even mean. But nevertheless, this is where it all begins. And in this Vedic period, again, 1500 to 700 or so BCE, when we get to the end of that, we're going to shift our conversation into another later set of texts called the Upanishads. More on that in a moment. But I can't leave our thinking about the Vedas without sharing with you a passage from the most famous of the Vedas, the Rig Veda, probably the oldest of the Vedas. And I'm pulling it out of our anthology, The World's Wisdom by Philip Novak. The Hinduism chapter has a nice long section of excerpts from various Vedas and Upanishads. You're going to love it. And we're going to build some work around it soon. But today, I just want to share with you a really compelling creation story, in fact, from the Rig Veda. As I share this with you, it's on page 6 in Novak, if anybody wants to look it up. As I read this for you, in your mind, think back on whatever you remember about the book of Genesis, the creation story in the Bible, and kind of compare the two. See how they sound different. Are there any similarities? And what are the big differences that start to crop up? So, from the Rig Veda, then even nothingness was not, nor existence. There was no air then, nor the heavens beyond it. What covered it? Where was it? In whose keeping? Was there then a cosmic water in depths unfathomed? Then there were neither death nor immortality, nor was there then the torch of night and day. The One breathed windlessly and self-sustaining. There was that One then, and there was no other. At first there was only darkness wrapped in darkness. All this was only unillumined water. That One which came to be, enclosed in nothing, arose at last, born of the power of heat. In the beginning, desire descended on it. That was the primal seed, born of the mind. The sages who have searched their hearts with wisdom know that which is kin to that which is not. But after all, who knows and who can say whence it all came and how creation happened? The gods themselves are later than creation. So who knows truly whence it has arisen, whence all creation had its origin? He, whether he fashioned it, or he, whether he did not. He who surveys it all from highest heaven, he knows. Or maybe even he does not know. What a delightfully enigmatic creation story, filled really more with questions than with declarations of fact. So right away, the tone strikes you so different from Genesis, because Genesis is just like this and this and this happened in the end. The Rig Veda says, well, in the beginning, there was this period of indeterminacy. There wasn't anything. There wasn't existence. There wasn't even non-existence. And then comes the One, which isn't really defined, and it's not a God either. because that line later, the gods are later than this creation. That's the key difference between East and West. In Genesis and out of the Abrahamic faiths, God is the first cause out of which everything comes. But here, as we start to study these Eastern traditions in India, it is understood that being gives birth to the universe. And then the gods are just part of the created universe. The gods just work here. They aren't the ultimate source. They're part of the created world. So we're going to see in Hinduism a many-layered cake. And we're going to talk more in the next video about what that ultimate being is, what the Rig Veda refers to as the One. We'll unpack that as we go forward. So there's a little taste from one of the passages in the Rig Vedas, one of the most philosophical passages in all the Vedas. Let's turn now to our study of the Upanishads. Now, the Upanishads are really just the late Vedas. They're another collection of texts that come at the end of that Vedic period, around 500, say, BCE. That time of great flowering of wisdom all over the world, the 6th century BC, the century of Plato and Socrates and Aristotle in the Mediterranean, that period of the Buddha also in India, that period of Lao Tzu and Confucius in China, that period of the great Hebrew scriptures. It's as if the entire human race all over the world began to awaken into its philosophical maturity and began asking these deeper questions. Some philosophers call this the axis age or the axial age. An axle is a pivot point upon which everything turns. So it's as if our collective human evolution became more philosophical in the 6th century, and the Upanishads are a perfect example of that turning. The word Upanishads comes from the Sanskrit meaning sittings near a teacher. And we get the clear sense when we read the Upanishads, something's different. Something has changed from the earlier Vedas. The Vedas, again, were kind of professional texts, right? Priests talking to other priests about how to be a priest and how to pray to this God and that God. But with the Upanishads, we seem to have the recorded discourses of teachers and students who are students of the Vedic texts, who have devoted their lives steeped in Vedic wisdom teachings. But now they are turning to each other and chewing on it and trying to figure it out. And what they realize constitutes an enormous shift. To put it simply, the Vedas were outward turned toward the gods. The Upanishads are inward turned toward the God within. Here's the big realization of the Upanishads. The understanding starts to emerge, and you read it in these texts. The understanding starts to emerge that the cosmic sacred energy that animates all reality also is the cosmic sacred energy that animates me. And if I want to understand the universe, its cause and its unfolding, the best way to understand all that is not to look out there, but to look in here. And it is during this period, in the Upanishadic period, that practices like meditation and yoga begin to take hold. The idea that if I really want to understand, and I'll just use the Western word here, God, I don't need to look out there, I need to look in here. I need to get quiet. That's what meditation is essentially, right? Sit down, shut up, pull back from the sensory realm, and slip into the stillness. And there you will start to not intellectually understand, but you will start to experience the ground of being from which all things come. That's the essential message of the Upanishads again and again and again. It is essentially, I guess I'll put it this way, the Upanishads are an investigation into the nature of the universe via or by an investigation into the nature of consciousness. This thing that is within us, my friends, awareness, consciousness, that's the laboratory in which these students study. So what we're talking about really is a school of thought in Hinduism called Vedanta. Vedanta means the end or culmination of the Vedas. And you just heard me say the Upanishads come at the end of the Vedic period. So to give this work a label, the teachings of the Upanishads are essentially known as Vedanta. So really we're going to start using that word more and more instead of Hinduism, because Hinduism is just too big and broad and it contains too many parts, right? It's a lot of different things. But as we dive deeper into our study of the Upanishads and the teachings of the Upanishads, which is where we're going to stay for a while, the best label for that body of thought is Vedanta. And what is the core realization of the Upanishads? That all is one. That we are all aspects of the one that you just heard me read about in the Rig Veda. That the one poured forth from itself all of this. It poured forth the gods. It poured forth all matter. It poured forth all energy. It poured forth all consciousness. And so as you and I, as these delightful human beings, have taken form in this world, corporeal, material, energy beings, conscious beings, we are aspects of the one. And that is exactly where we're going to pick up in our second video, because we're going to give the one a name. We're going to call it Brahman, Brahman, Atman. And that's our next video. So I'll see you on the other side.